All right. Hi. Thanks for watching this live stream. I'm doing this as a project for my English 102 class. I'm going to be doing and presenting my research project that I spent the last few weeks working on. Um, just at the top, before we get started, I just want everybody to know that there is going to be a content warning. We're going to be talking about fascism and American politics and the state of politics in general. And later in the live stream, eventually we'll talk a little bit about the fascism that's happening around the world and a few of the genocides that are happening associated with that. So if anybody uh, doesn't it feels kind of off put by those topics, then feel free to sign off. That's totally fine. But first, I'm just going to present the project, and then I'm going to sort of go a little bit deeper into detail about the research that I did, but didn't include in the paper because it didn't fit or because I couldn't find appropriate sources that supported the ideas, um, things of that nature. And then after that, we'll do a little bit of digging into the various forms of fascism that we can see around the world and examples of like Myanmar. There's fascism rising in China right now. There's fascism in Russia, Brazil, India, America, and other various places across the globe. We won't get into all of it, but we'll definitely be examining a few prominent examples of fascism as it appears around the world. So, without any further ado, I'll go ahead and get started with the project. So, this is the ins and outs of fascism by myself, Dylan Cornell. The ins and outs of fascism, understanding and identifying fascism. It's been said that when fascism comes to America, it'll be draped in the American flag carrying a cross. It arrived as exactly that. The rise of fascism in America has echoes of past fascist uprising in various parts of the world. Fascism is able to take on many identities because of its reactionary reflex that comes from a shift in social paradigms that threaten pre-existing power structures, ensuring that fascism can arise anywhere in the world. Fascism can be identified through understanding its core concepts, the varying ideas that lie at the heart of the ideology. Each of these concepts serves a crucial role in ensuring that fascism thrives wherever it may rear its ugly head. Some of the central concepts that bind the fascist regimes across time and space tend to fall into five categories. First, a return to tradition. Second, division between groups. Third, an obsession with violence. Fourth, the presence of a strongman. And fifth, the rejection and condemnation of intellectualism. Understanding fascism and fascistic movements taking root in different places around the world may give us the opportunity to be able to see them and notice them before they gain prominence and, with any luck, prevent them from coming to power again. Because whenever fascism becomes the law of the land, people die. Fascism is an ideology that is nearly 100 years old and has had time to evolve in order to fit the varying demographics that it can find itself in across the planet. Jason Stanley, a philosopher professor at Yale University, draws many parallels between the Republican Party and fascist Italy and Germany in the 1920s. Quote, if you use history and philosophy as a guide, it is easy to see parallels between Trump's words and those of the most reviled fascists in history. Conversely, Sherry Brennan, a journalist for World Policy Journal, ties the ideology of fascism to a group of people halfway across the world. Quote, while old-style fascism is defunct in its original home, Europe, its spirit lives on in another part of the world in the guise of radical Islam. The presence of fascism in varying parts of the world demonstrates its ability to evolve so as to fit into whichever social order in which it arises. If labels are interchangeable, then fascism is neither Christian nor Muslim, but whatever the religion of the dominant population is. Neither is it white nor Arab, only that which falls in line with the dominant ethnic group. The flexibility of fascism lies in its ability to swap out labels as needed to appeal to the political group who will rally around it. usually whichever group is reacting to the changes of the predominant social order that kept that demographic in their higher position in the social hierarchy. One of the main appeals of fascism comes in its ability to weaponize nostalgia. Typically, the reality of this past rarely ever actually matters. Rather, the acceptance of the mythologized version of history is the aim. In an article written for the New York Book Review, Umberto Eco addresses what he calls Urfascism or eternal fascism. He describes 14 characteristics that outline the different traits of fascism. In the first and second points, he outlines how tradition and fascist rhetoric is juxtaposed to a less moral and more hedonistic modernity that strays away from the historically more moral tradition. The truth of the matter is irrelevant to the fascist agenda, only that the patrons of fascism believe it to be true. Eco points out this rejection of modernity as irrational. Quote, the rejection of the modern world was distinguished as a rebuttal of the capitalistic way of life, but it mainly concerns the rejection of the spirit of 1789 and, of course, 1776. The Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, is seen as the beginning of modern depravity. In this sense, fascism can be defined as irrational. There is another interpretation of this concept that I would like to assert. The idea that the cult of tradition can not only apply to returning to tradition, but the maintaining of a perceived tradition. Many fascist parties have come to power around the world and throughout time with no mythologized past to use to appeal to the populace. The Confederate States of America, for example, can be argued to have been fascist. However, their concept of tradition played into maintaining the institutions that kept themselves in power, and any attempts to dismantle that power structure as an attack on their traditions. The next tenet of fascism is one that makes it extremely dangerous. One of the primary modes of fascist thought is that division between groups of people. You have inclusionary us groups and the external them groups with fascism seeks to other. As Seva Gunitsky points out in his article for the Washington Post, division, whether it's between Germans and Jews, Hindus and Muslims, citizens and foreigners, whites and blacks, fascists succeed by turning groups against each other. When people are divided, they are easier to manipulate. Fear of the outsider is a powerful motivator for a fascist base. It energizes them and directs their focus against whichever group has been designated the other. For 1930s Germany, it was the Jews. In China, today, it's the Uyghur Muslims. And in America, it's immigrants and trans people. There are countless examples of instances in which fascist parties will espouse rhetoric in which the other is painted in a way that they are deemed the cause of the problems and social frustrations among participants in the fascist us group. This feeling of tension, fear, and hatred towards the other is what puts fascist parties in power and allows them to pass such devastating policies in order to strip those groups of their autonomy, rights, and eventually their lives. Violence holds a special place in fascist ideology. From the glorification of the military to the cult of the hero, Eco's 11th characteristic, violence is the key policy that fascist movements will use to push their policies onto the other. In an article for his magazine, Matthew Rothschild, a former editor and publisher for the Progressive magazine, quotes Chip Burlett, an investigative journalist, talking about the rise of violence among fascists. The mentally unstable people act first, he says. They fly a plane into an IRS building in Texas, or they shoot police officers in Pittsburgh, referring to Andrews Joseph Stack and Richard Poplawski. What happens next? Some underground cells, whether out of a militia or white supremacist movement, do a propaganda of the deed, a dramatically violent act, to move the Tea Party into armed revolt. He's talking about the Tea Party. Fascists will use violence in large quantities in order to push the base further into committing more violent acts, similar to a domino effect. One such demonstration of this was the racially motivated attack on a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. Right-wing and fascist media outlets will simultaneously claim the other is responsible, while also stating that the motive of the violent act is justified. All of this is to lead the movement further and further into a state where violence is the only possible solution to the problem of dealing with the other. The strongman for fascism is a central figure in which the ideology surrounds itself. Without the strongman, there can be no fascist movement. The idea of the need for a strongman plays into the great man interpretation of history, which states that great men are responsible for the changes that have transpired throughout human history. This notion, of course, is untrue. Jason Stanley states in his video, quote, "From Mussolini to Hitler to Erdogan, fascist leaders positioned themselves as father figures and strongmen. As long as he, and yes, it's always a he, remains in power, everything is possible. Without him, the whole system collapses." The strong man at the center of any fascist party is poised as a mythological figure with supernatural and incredible abilities to fix all the world's problems as long as he gets his way. Consider Trump, the current head of the Republican Party. Half of his rhetoric consists of him fluffing himself and repeating the lines, "I am the only one who can solve these problems." Analogous to the cult of tradition, the cult of personality that surrounds the strongman is less about the actual capability of the strongman and more about the base's willingness to accept the myth that the strongman is capable of doing what he claims to be able to do. As long as his word and will are carried out, then the goals of the fascist party can be met, and thus the world made a better place. The strongman's job is to make hard decisions, the impossible task of deciding how to address the other, even if it means doing the unthinkable. The final point to discuss is fascism's dedication to irrationalism. It is persistence in the rejection of intellectualism. Umberto Eco cites the rejection of intellectualism as in several points in his 14 characteristics. From point 3, the cult of action, thinking is a form of emasculation. Therefore, culture is suspect insofar as it is identified with critical attitudes. Distrust of the intellectual world has always been a symptom of fascism. And from point 4, the critical spirit making distinctions and to distinguish is a sign of modernism. In modern culture, the scientific community praises disagreement in a way to improve knowledge. For fascism, disagreement is treason. It is critical for the survival of fascism that the participants do not think deeply on their beliefs. Given fascism's use of machismo, many people think that intellectualism, or thinking deeply about things, was emasculating as a way to prevent their base from thinking about the arguments presented to them. When faced with genuine intellectual rigor, the arguments and conspiracies that fascists will use in their rhetoric tends to fall apart, and must therefore be avoided at all costs. The devil is in the details, as it were. In conclusion, it may be easy to believe that no one could ever fall into the mindset of a fascist, but this notion is false. Fascism arises from the shifting of hierarchical structures that favor one demographic over another. Therefore, anyone can become a fascist. Learning what fascism is can help people from succumbing to its influence. Fascism is a complex and dangerous ideology, but learning how to identify fascism wherever and however it appears is crucial for combating it. We must always be vigilant in safeguarding ourselves from fascism. There are more characteristics that we haven't covered here, but learning as much as we can about fascism can help prevent it from surfacing again. So, that is the long and short of my research presentation. So now what I want to do is I want to dig into some of the other research that I didn't include in my paper, as well as maybe look at some examples of fascism as it takes its form around the world. So, the first things that I would like to show... The first thing that I want to do is look into some of the extra points that Umberto Eco talked about in his article that he wrote for the New York Book Review in 1995. I'll just go through the list very quickly. So the first one that we had was the cult of tradition, and the ideas behind Umberto Eco's cult of tradition and the cult of tradition that Jason Stanley talks about are slightly different, but there's some overlap. So, in Jason Stanley's interpretation of the cult of tradition, he basically states that in their, where is it? We wrote the Constitution. Did you ever hear this before? I can hear it again. Fascists create an overwhelming sense of nostalgia for the past that is racially pure, traditional, and patriarchal. So, Jason Stanley talks more about the emotional appeal, whereas Umberto Eco talks more about the moral sense of the cultural tradition. So Umberto Eco says that when he's talking about the appeal to tradition, he's talking about the appeal to sort of a higher prescriptive moral value that tradition has, as opposed to modernity, where modernity is the beginning of the sort of degeneration of the moral character of society that fascism uses as a weapon uh, to sort of draw lines between an us and a them. You know, we want to return to a sense of tradition. They want to embrace modernism, which is degenerate in a way. And then we have the rejection of modernism, in which he talks about the idea of the. This is where that sort of rejection of the modernist ideals comes into play, right? So like this is where we get our quote for the second portion of the second Umberto Eco quote. The rejection of the modern world was disguised as a rebuttal of the capitalistic way of life, but is mainly concerned with a rejection of the spirit of the Enlightenment. 3, action for action's sake. So this is kind of like the concept of a person, and this also feeds into um, one of his later characteristics, the cult of heroism, where he talks about in fascism people are conditioned to be heroes, as opposed to understanding that there's like positive qualities to self preservation. But the reason for the cult of the hero is so that the sort of the higher ups in whatever fascist movement are can condition the lowers to be able to like give their lives in military service. Think about the Nazis. That they conditioned people, like think about like the Hitler Youth, where they were basically brought up to be willing to sacrifice their lives for the Nazi cause. Is one of the is another reason why fascism is so dangerous, because it emboldens people to distrust the intellectual as well as embrace the sort of uncritical thought that is involved with fascism. There's one that I wanted to look at, which was the obsession with the plot is a good one. To people who feel deprived of a clear social identity, fascism says that their only privilege is the most common one, to be born in the same country. This is the origin of nationalism. Besides, the only ones who can provide an identity to the nation are its enemies. Thus, at the root of fascism psychology, there is the obsession with a plot, possibly an international one. The followers must feel besieged. The easiest way to solve the plot is to appeal to xenophobia, but the plot must also come from the inside. Jews are usually the biggest target because they have the advantage of being at the same time inside and outside. In the U.S., a prominent instance of the plot obsession is to be found in Pat Robinson's The New World Order, but as we've recently seen, there are many others. So this is an interesting thought. Think about how Trump uses immigration rhetoric in order to energize his base. This is basically that. So the obsession with the plot is that it also has to do something with like all of the different conspiracies that are peddled by right wing um, pundits. So like the Great Replacement. Think of the Tucker Carlson and his Great Replacement theory, or the one that well, I guess it's not really his, but it's the one that he himself espouses constantly on his talk show, and it's the idea that the Democrats want immigrants to come to America to dilute the political power of white people, whatever white means. So the natural conclusion is what we have, like what happened in Buffalo, New York. He was directly motivated by um, those conspiracy theories that basically state that the white people and their political power in America is under attack. So that's sort of like the obsession with the plot, is the plot being sort of whatever conspiracy theories that fascists will use to um, sort of further their movements. One second, I'm going to see if I can't put myself on the screen here. Hey, there we go. Hold on. Bam. There's another one. The disdain for. Oh, here's that cult of the hero I was talking about earlier. And in such a perspective, everybody is educated to become a hero. In every mythology, the hero is an exceptional being, but in Earth fascism, heroism is the norm. This cult of heroism is strictly linked to the cult of death, and it is not by chance that the motto of the Phalangist was Viva la Muerte. In English, it can be translated as Long Live Death. In non-fascist societies, the lay public is told that death is unpleasant but must be faced with dignity. Believers are told that it is the painful way to reach a supernatural happiness. By contrast, the Ur-fascist hero craves heroic death, advertised as the best reward for heroic life. Ur-fascistic hero is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people to death. So this actually kind of reminds me of the Muslim fascists, where they'll use their religion and the idea of getting 72 versions after one heroically sacrifices themselves for their cause, as sort of the cult of the hero, the cult of heroism, or alternatively, like I said before, with the Nazis, is that they would basically say that if you die on the battlefield, you'll go to heaven. Let's see what else. There was one I wanted to talk about that was content for the week. There was one about a disdain for human rights. See if we can find it. Oh, here's a good one. Besides disagreement is a sign of diversity, Ur-fascism grows up and seeks for consensus by exploiting and exacerbating the natural fear of difference. The first appeal of a fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruder. Thus, Ur-fascism is racist by definition. This is an interesting sort of topic that we actually see constantly throughout the history of fascism. Take the genocide of the Rohingya people right now that's going on in Myanmar. There is a very distinct line being drawn, not just religiously, but also racially, in that the Buddhist majority of Myanmar currently believe that it's typical fascist rhetoric, right? I mean, they're making up conspiracy theories about the people and then energizing their base in order to commit terrible acts against them. I actually have an article about it pulled up right here. The Rohingya people, excuse me, not Rohingya. And this sort of goes into the Safety for those responsible for the genocide and crimes against humanity, guarding a responsible number of atrocities committed across Burma as we stand with the precious justice of survivors and victims. I mean, look at these people. They're just innocent people. There's children here, you know? And I think that it is fairly easy to draw a line between the, between what's happening right now in Myanmar and fascism. So, actually, ironically enough, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that this is from previous things that I was looking at. Oop. The current, or was once current, president of Myanmar is, I think it's this woman. I think it's this woman right here, which is interesting because sort of in contrast to Jason Stanley's observation that every strong man throughout history has always been a man, there are actually two examples, at least two that I can find, of the strong man actually being a woman. The first one is this one that's happening right now in Myanmar, and then the second one is in Italy. That's not it. Here we go. Nope, that's not it either. Where was that one that I had? That's fine. This woman. Bam. So this woman, I don't remember her name. She recently was just actually elected prime minister of Italy, and funny fact about her, she belongs to the same political party as Benito Mussolini once was. In fact, I don't know if they'll show it here, but I don't think that they do. The symbol, their icon that they use for their like on their website and stuff, is actually the old party symbol, but it has that it has the eternal flame of Benito Mussolini's grave on it. Like there's like a torch in the middle, and it's supposed to be representative of Benito Mussolini's sort of like grave marker flame that's on his sort of altar. But I wanted to keep this under 30 minutes. But it's the main point that I wanted to get with this particular project was identifying fascism and being able to sort of get across the idea that fascism isn't unique to any one particular demographic or group or subgroup of ethnicities or religions or whatever. I wanted to sort of present fascism in a way that was independent of immutable characteristics in order to emphasize the idea that fascism is not unique to any one ideology or any one ethnicity or any one religion or anything like that. And I hope that I've managed to accomplish that. But for now, I think as long as I need to keep it under 30 minutes, I'm going to have to go ahead and... Oh, thanks, Scott. I just saw your chat. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, there's only 3 people watching, so I don't imagine you will. That's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, everyone who tuned in, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.